I'm going to talk about some router safety. In our shop we've got a few different kinds of routers. The first one is this big handheld router that we use in most of our woods classes. It can handle some pretty large bits. Whereas we have a palm router that we use in our DIY classes. We usually put on some smaller bits on this so it's less aggressive. And then the last one that we have is our table router. So I'm going to talk about all three of these right now. Now the whole purpose of using a router is to give some shape to the irises on a piece of material. So that's that corner where two surfaces meet. Instead of having it sharp and square like this, we can give it some kind of shape depending on what kind of bit that you choose. So we've got kits full of all sorts of different sizes and shapes of bits that you can put into the router. So you want to just pick something that you like. And you can always test it out on a piece of scrap wood if you're unsure. So if you want to put a bit in, what we're going to do is take our router, I'm going to unlock the base, and then I'm just going to twist it off. Okay? I'm doing all this while it's unplugged. Never do any adjustments to the tools when it's plugged in, right? So it's unplugged. Then I want to grab some router wrenches. They look like this. They're made especially for this router, and the palm router has its own router wrenches. But what we're going to do is use these wrenches to loosen and tighten the router collet. The collet is the part of the router that actually holds the bit in. So you can put them on each half the collet, open it up, tighten it back up once you put the bit that you want. Then I'm just going to take my base again. Gotta make sure this is nice and tight. Otherwise it can drift out of the collet and that causes you problems. Okay? So I'm going to put the base on and I'm just going to twist it. When I twist it, that changes my depth of cut. So you can set it where you think it's going to be good. It's better to start shallow and then go deeper because you can always cut off more. So I'm going to start where I think it's kind of shallow and I'm going to lock it back onto the base. So now my router is all set. On our little palm routers, it's kind of similar. We loosen and tighten the router collet with router wrenches, but we want to remove the base. If you need to do that, give me a holler because it's a little more of a process when you're changing bits on the palm routers. But basically they work off the same principles. So that one's all set. Now if I want to change a bit on my table router, it's exactly the same as this router. It's just mounted upside down. So if I look inside of here, I can see how that's mounted. I also have a hole cut out of the bottom. So I can tip it on its side, and now I can unlock it and twist the router motor out and then change my bit that way and then put it back in the hole and lock it back in when I'm done. So then I've already got this bit set and the depth of cut is all set. So now what I want to do is worry about my piece of material. Right? If I just put it on the work table, it can slide around a lot. We need to secure the material. So you can do that one of three ways. First of all, you could clamp it, right? Depending on what you need to route on your piece of material and where you position your clamps, that's completely up to you. Do what's going to work best for you. So we can clamp it down to the table. If it allows for you to route the edges, ends, whatever, you could put it in a vise as long as the router isn't going to come close to the vise. And your last option, which is probably the most popular option, is to use a router mat. So it's a little rubberized mat like this. We just set it on our work surface and we put our piece of material on it. Now, as I put a little downward pressure, it doesn't slide around. Okay, so you always want to have more downward pressure than side pressure. Otherwise, it can slide across the mat. So make sure you push down on that. All right. I'm going to save these clamps for my table router later. But right now, I've got this pretty much set. So what I want to do now is take my router and I'm going to set it onto the piece of material. And I want to check to see if this pilot wheel. So the pilot wheel is what runs along the edge of the material to allow the bit to cut an even distance from the edge. So I want to make sure that this bit, this pilot wheel, is not touching the tabletop. Okay, so if it is touching the tabletop, we're going to have to make some adjustments. I don't want to change my depth of cut because it's already where I want it. You don't want to change that depth of cut because that's what you like. So instead what I'm going to do is adjust my piece of material. So if this bit is hitting the table, All I have to do is move it over toward the edge of the table. It's still on my router mat, but now I've got all this room down here that the pilot wheel can clear, right? So it's not going to get in the way, it's not going to screw up my depth of cut as I go across. So then I just set it on and I'm good to go. Okay? So now what I want to do is plug it in, and I'm going to cut from my left side to my right side. Okay? So when you plug in a router, you always want to have someone hold on to the router when you plug it in. Alright, my router is all plugged in, I'm ready to go. My pilot wheel does not touch the table, so I'm going to put my piece of material right in the middle of my router mat. I'm going to flip it on, I'm going to flip it over, I'm going to put it flat on the face of the board and bring it in until the pilot wheel hits the edge, and I'm going to go from left to right with the handheld router. Okay, so it looks like this. I always want to hold on to the router until the bit comes to a complete stop. And when you're all done, you can unplug it. Right now, with our palm router, you can hold it with one palm. I suggest putting both hands on the router like this. That way, when you're routing, you're not tempted to have your other hand over here trying to hold the material, and then if anything slips, you can cut your other hand. So I always suggest putting both hands on the router. So I can just switch it on, and the same thing. I'm going to cut from left to right. Again, when you're done, unplug it. That's it. Okay, so there is our two handheld routers. Now I'm going to switch over to the table router. Alright, with the table router, again, we need to secure it. So I'm going to take my clamps, and I'm just going to clamp my table router down to the work table. I'm all set. Our safety clearance is 4 inches, so I always got to keep my hands at least 4 inches away from the moving cutter head. If your hands are going to come closer, especially when you're using narrower materials like this one, you probably need to use a push block. So with this one, it's all secured so I can plug it in. Now, with the table router, the router is actually upside down, so everything's kind of reversed. Instead of going left to right, now I'm going to feed the material from right to left across the table router. Okay, so you can just flip the switch on the side. All right, once it stops, you can unplug it, clean up your area, and you're all done.